Talib, could you introduce yourself a bit for us?
I was trained in sociology, that is my academic background. To even go further back in my own autobiographical history, is that I was born in an institution that was very consciously created for an alternative education, alternative to colonial education in Delhi, during the pre-independent period. And the meaning of alternative education was that how should learners and students be introduced to their own environment, and how would their own tradition and their cultural values become part of education and not be discarded in the educational sphere. In practical terms, colonial education meant that there was something that was taught in educational sphere, colleges, schools, that was not relevant to what they were taught at home, to what their faith tradition was telling them. So there was a disjunction, a hiatus, a gap between the student's personal life and their life in education. So this was my starting point. And then I wanted to pursue sociology as an attempt to understand my own society. That was my passion. So I did my MA and my DPhil in anthropology, sociology. I'm using social anthropology and sociology interchangeably because they are very kindred disciplines, and the subjects that I did during my MA days was really a blend of both social anthropology and sociology.
Yes,
then after that, my basic monograph, which I did as part of my doctoral dissertation, was on marginalized community, the stone breakers in Delhi. This was an issue that was raised by human rights organizations, and I wanted to study that. But I used those tools that I had gathered to study religion, particularly Islam, in where I was living. For example, there was a resurgence, there was an increasing visible presence of Islam on campuses during the 80s. And my question was why? Tabligh network was spreading, Sufi networks were already visible, madrasas were being talked about in the discourse. So I had this desire to know what was this movement all about. So I wrote something on Tabligh as a participant observer. I even went to Darul Uloom Deoband and stayed there to understand what is the meaning of sacred knowledge and how does it connect to communities in the neighborhood. I also studied Sufi networks, particularly a case study for Chishti Khanqa in North India. And when I came to Oxford, and there was a call for fellowship in anthropology of Muslim societies, so I presented my experience of studying Madrasah and Tabligh and Sufi networks. And it was on that basis that I got into this position.
Thank you very much. My next question is about Islamic education in general. What are the main challenges Islamic education is facing today? What do you think about?
I mean, I would say, first of all, let me just give you a brief on some of the misgivings of modern education about Islamic education. And I would say these are not really they need to be put in a wider perspective. For example, there is an allegation that Islamic education doesn't say much about future of children, their employability, their position in the secular world, as if being a madrasa graduate means that you are good for nothing else. You are just connected to God and to your perhaps little life, but nothing beyond. And I would say that from a social science perspective, we need to put what's happening in this sector in a wider perspective. Please bear in mind that the modern educational sector actually cannot absorb most population in a given society. After all, modern education is funded by the state, mostly. When it is privatized, it doesn't get much help from industries, from manufacturers, from the industrial bureaucratic sector. The private education commodifies education and expects the consumers to bear the cost of it, taking the view that modern education is, after all, providing jobs to the learners, to the students, to the graduates of secular education. Now, I would say that the consumer of modern education, the biggest consumer of modern education, is really the industrialists and the modern sector. But they don't recognize it, because if they do so, they will have to provide the subsidy for modern education. Now, so we have two situations. One is a madrasa education, which is in its own shell, for example, if you might say, and modern education whose cost is borne mostly by the consumers. There's no free education. I'm not talking about Turkey, I'm talking about India, or for that matter, some of the European countries, or most European countries, in particular Great Britain. Now, we need to put madrasa education in a perspective to say that madrasa education in itself has been pushed to the margin and to the marginalized classes. So the modal reality of those who come to education for madrasa education are the poor section. Madrasa education is funded by the community and by the big benefactors, but not by the modern state. For name's-sake, there is this modernization of education program, madrasa education program, so madrasas are also funded very little by the state. When I went to, there's one part of the story that madrasa is to be seen in the context of poor support from the modern sector. They are just on their own. But what do we learn from them? Can modern education learn from madrasa? And I would say yes, definitely, in the following respects. Modern education treats education as if it is an instrument, as if it's a kind of a passport that takes you into bureaucratic apparatuses, that takes you into industrial sector, but it doesn't connect you to your character, to the fact that you are a citizen, and a citizen not in a passive sense but in an active sense. There is a difference between being a passive and an active citizen. A passive citizen is one who takes the law of the land as if it's a sacred ruling. And to be an active citizen is to say that this particular law is unjust and we need to re-legislate, we need to rewrite our constitution. That ability, that confidence is something that one should get ideally. The madrasa can actually teach to the modern sector. Madrasas depend on community funding. Madrasa connects to its community, and in many ways madrasa is a very bottom-up reality. It is connected, anchored in the wishes of the community. In anthropology of education, we use a particular phrase. We say either the education is a dependent formation or it is a formative force. By dependent formation, it means whatever the wider society is giving it, it is that. To be a formative force means that its blueprint can be translated into the making of society. Unfortunately, modern education is very much a dependent force, dependent formation, because it does what the industrial class wants it to do. It does what the bureaucracy is asking it to do. There was one very interesting critique, a poet in 20th century India, and he commented on colonial education and modern education, and its rough translation into English would be that what glorious deeds our fellows have performed. What glorious deeds our fellows have performed. Did BA, got a job, got the pension and died. This is the tragedy of modern education. But Madrasah education not only gives you a kind of a character, a value system, but it makes you a worthy citizen who can even critique, who has the capacity to critique the wider society. We normally stereotypically say these madrasa people are only bothered about right and wrong, about haram and halal. We mustn't belittle that. It may be, I can understand, sometimes you take things too far, but actually they have the capacity to say what is right and what is wrong.
In this sense, well, how do you see the future of Islamic education, Madrasa education? How can we present Islamic education to the society in a better way?
I mean, basically, some of the elementary features of Madrasa education was that it connected, roughly speaking, it connected to the at least 4 elements in the world of a learner, connecting it to the heavens, to the earth, to the fellow beings, and to that tool which tells you about the sky, heavens, and the earth and how they are connected in a moral frame. By moral, I don't mean very fixed article of faith. I'm not saying morality in terms of a tool, a rod in the hand of a mudarris, and he says this is right, that is wrong. But a kind of a capacity that comes from within. You are trained into thinking that is haram, in fact, which disconnects you to your fellow beings, which disconnects you from the matters of the creation and creator, that disconnects you from how you ought to be connected to all these features and make them and spread that knowledge to others. That to me is an elementary feature of a madrasa education. Yes, in a current state, in the current state of qiyamah in a way, I mean, things are so disconnected. Qiyamah is disconnection basically. It's a context of war, it's a context of huge suspicion by the state about Islamic education. I view madrasa education and modern education to be existing in some kind of a symbiosis, conversation, and without that exchange.
Yes. Yes. I want to pass from feature to future.
Yes. And future would mean, I mean, after all, when we talk about future in the context of modern education, the future is the future of the industrial class, the future of the bureaucratic class. Seldom do we talk about future of a collective humanity. I would say that what is the relationship between a community and the environment around, environment that has been given to you by your creator. And you are a custodian of that environment. So Islamic education teaches you how to be that custodian. I could relate to my environment in terms of an I-it relationship or an I-thou relationship. I-it relationship is that all the world around me is objects, and I can use them to my benefit, to my desire, to my greed. But I-thou relationship would mean that I am connected to my world, and it's a win-win situation. I draw upon my resources of the world, but in such a manner that I allow them to regenerate itself and allow me, the relationship allows both of us to regenerate. And future actually is implicit in the present. I do not believe in future which is disconnected from the present. The trouble with the modern education is that its present is disconnected with the future. And I would say that Islamic education, in focusing on present in a big way, connects automatically with the present, with the future. The future must be anchored in the present. And that is the capacity which Islamic education gives in ample measure.
Yes, thank you very much for your views, opinions.